Welcome everyone, I'm Annabelle from Lark Industries. We appreciate you joining us for Nature Play, not just rocks and logs. Given we'll be asking a number of questions today, we'd love to hear any perspectives you might wish to share. So please feel free to contribute using our Q&A function or your Q&A function, and we will answer these via email after the event. Without further ado, I'll turn you over to Ashley Walker. Welcome, Ashley.
Thanks, Annabelle. Hi everyone, and thanks for taking the time to join us for today's online learning, which we will ask questions about nature play and how it can be approached. We will focus on some of the traditional ways to approach nature play and the challenges that can arise, and further look to explore some alternatives which may address how we can provide nature play in a variety of spaces, places, and environments with the goal to maximise opportunities for children of all ages to be creative and active. Today's agenda will cover three main topics, which will surely ask more questions than it answers. We will set out to challenge some of the preconceived notions of what nature play entails and hope to emphasise the message that nature play is in fact one for interpretation and broad influence. We start by discussing how do we interpret nature play, the important word here being interpret, as the idea of nature play is seemingly just in its name, nature and play. However, the execution of this is highly subjective and debated, and can easily lead to praise or criticism depending on your position. As an extension of this interpretation and subjection, we then look at some of the challenges that are faced when designing nature play. Is it simply a matter of placing some bluestone, laying some red gum, sprinkling some mulch, and dusting some sand and calling it a day? Some would surely fold their arms, nod their head, agree and say that's a job well done. However, we believe there is more to be considered. And lastly, we'll discuss the notion of building nature play, and if this very idea is wrong. If it's not, then how can we look to sympathetically build nature play with the intent to be able to address some of the very challenges that it presents? Over the last 10 years in particular, there's been a shift to more natural or nature play elements included into a place-based design. So why is this? Well, one reason could be due to biophilia. But what is biophilia? So biophilia in humans is our inbuilt tendency to want to be closely associated with and other forms of life in nature. The term is believed to be first coined by the social psychologist Erich Fromm in the 1960s and later popularised in the mid-1980s by biologist Edward Wilson. Biophilic design has been embraced by the design fraternity globally and primarily forms the basis of the design philosophy, which is if design doesn't focus on the aspects of the natural world that contribute to human health and productivity in the age-old struggle to be fit and survive, it's not biophilic, which leads us nicely to nature play. So a moment ago, I made a somewhat tongue-in-cheek comment as to how we can simply create and design a nature play experience using 4 simple yet natural ingredients. Here we see these 4 ingredients being rocks, sand, logs, and mulch. And there are some distinct and charming characteristics that give these items their position on the nature play podium. These are that they're all natural materials, they are all locally sourced, either from the immediate geography or more broadly from Australia. There are no bright colours. All materials present varied tactile sensory experiences. However, all materials may still only provide the foundation for nature play, rather than a full experience for children to play, engage, and develop. As we progress, we'll provide some commentary as to why this might not be the complete solution. So our fourth point for discussion today is how we might interpret nature play. One statement is, nature play is any activity that gets children active or thinking actively outdoors, with the end goal of building skills and the ability to play without the need for parental or adult control. This can be in any setting, so long as it occurs outdoors. This is quite far-reaching, and I'm sure there are some who would disagree with this sentiment, given its broad and general evaluation. This statement could argue that the traditional neighbourhood park fits within the definition of nature play, even whilst missing out some of the necessary qualities. For those wondering, this definition has come from a nature play organisation here in Australia. So to try and come up with a more definitive interpretation, we asked a number of landscape architects from around Australia for their insights and comments on two very simple questions. Firstly, what is nature play? And can nature play be built? Here are two examples of the feedback we received. The first response was more of a traditionalist approach. Nature play consists of using natural materials, wood, sand, water, rocks, to create an immersive, interactive experience by manipulating natural material, like a pile of leaves, twigs, strappy grasses, etc. It's about using natural materials from the region to give a sense of place, and also using natural materials to encourage insects, birds, lizards, and other wildlife to occupy the space to create a natural habitat. The screen. The second response was more liberal in its interpretation. We approach nature play as more of an overall feel and philosophy. It's the philosophy of having children interact with natural elements in a natural setting, but at the same time having challenges for people of all ages and abilities. A full play experience needs to be offered to give the requisite challenges, particularly upper body exercises, and this is done most effectively incorporating equipment that is sympathetic to the environment and the surroundings. We feel keywords here are challenges for all ages and abilities, which could lead itself to the requirement for the built form. To try and show these two different interpretations, here we see four different images which we are describing as the cycles of nature play. From the fallen tree, cut to be a sculptural play element, to the arranged branches with ropes for climbing and balancing, to the enclosed wooden tower with bird's nest and slide, to the steel trees in a natural tone with concrete paths and rubber softball. As we progress through the cycle, we see increasing levels of built form and movement away from the traditional elements. All these images, however, interpret nature play in their own way. So which does it most effectively? And is this the best outcome for the children's experience? As you can see, nature play is difficult to define as there are so many interpretations based upon people's own perceptions, as well as what we'll hope to achieve from a nature play space. Is it about all ages? Is it about grubby knees? Is it to provide a traditional full play experience? Over to you, Ryan.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. So far, we've looked to provide more of an overarching vision of nature play's interpretation. However, if we dig a little deeper, a few more questions will surely arise, which allows us to think more critically and challenge how far we can expand the interpretation of nature play. A couple of questions we thought we should ask. Is nature play just an experience and shaped by one's surroundings? Is nature play simply a matter of touch and feel, the dirt in your hands and the logs under your feet? If it looks like nature, is it nature? By that, if we make it look authentic enough, is that good enough? Are there basic requirements or obligations that we need to address in order for a design to be considered nature play? On face value, nature play appears to be the very nirvana of design intention. It removes all the man-made interventions which we're all too often surrounded and consumed by. Nature, and by extension nature play, is that peaceful place we all wish to escape and to immerse ourselves more simply, focusing on our senses and the natural world around us. However, as with all design principles and human experiences, there are challenges that arise, which are ironically shaped and influenced by the very world and surroundings we are looking to escape. Here we outline 5 factors that challenge nature play, each which make the execution of nature play that little bit more complicated. The idea here is to simply highlight that nature play is not an exact science, and that a sense of open-mindedness could be explored and varied approaches considered. At the end of the day, our responsibility is to design play influenced by nature, rather than recreating or redesigning nature itself for the open space. So the first of our challenges is that of urbanisation and development. In a previous online learning session relating to interactive technology-based play, we made a comment as to how urbanisation, commercial and residential development has led to a reshaping of the way in which children play and the spaces in which they play in. This very much has an impact on design and how it is approached, and also the ways in which we need to consider a harmony with the environment in which they're built. This message, whilst discussed in two very different contexts, is a universal idea when exploring challenges relating to all types of play. As a result of expanding urban development, it's increasingly difficult to create natural environments when combating with developed and built up surroundings. Nature play requires green space to seamlessly connect with the landscape. However, as these traditional green landscapes are quickly diminishing in the pursuit of growth and development, it's surely increasingly difficult to design sprawling nature with less environment in which to draw inspiration. The ability to create nature in an urban space is challenging. The look and feel of nature play, whilst calming and neutral, is difficult to execute in a highly urbanised area, which would equally take inspiration from urban surroundings and sympathise with its more urban, modernist or architectural intent. A far stretch from the natural philosophies of nature play. Our next challenge faced by nature play revolves around children's dependency on technology for play and enjoyment. Now, the tech versus nature debate could in itself form an entirely new online session in isolation, as the concept is so highly debated with substantial literature arguing positives both for and against. So children's growing immersion in technology is as much a symptom as a cause of their disconnect from the outdoors. Children are increasingly dependent on technology for at many times lack of a better alternative. Society doesn't make it easy for children to satisfy their appetite for experience or to explore and discover the world beyond their front door. Globally, these opportunities have been shrinking for decades, and given children's insatiable hunger for experience, and especially for stimulation, challenge, and social contact with friends or peers, relying on technology to feed this hunger is an understandable response. Technology has become so immersive that children are increasingly dependent on various technologies and platforms for recognition, stimulation, or validation, whether this is rightly or wrongly so, something they believe nature play unfortunately cannot provide. So our next challenge, can nature play be too predictable? Some may have a passionate objection to this idea that nature play can be too predictable. After all, nature play is inherently subtle and discreet in its delivery rather than flamboyant and ostentatious. Some may say this lack of flair may be its downfall. But again, we need to remind ourselves that in the pursuit of designing a play space, we may need to consider more than just the natural aspect of play and look to add value to the traditional ingredients which children love and naturally gravitate towards. In doing so, we look to add broader challenges and excitement which may be difficult to execute simply through nature play in its most raw form. Much of what we've attempted to achieve in playground design revolves around interesting engagement through subtlety, the hope to provide a sense of uniqueness, something that's memorable but does not stray too far from a particular formula that works. So what questions do we ask? How can we exactly make a nature play space more memorable? What makes a design or space different? Or what is the appeal or draw card of a particular space? Can the traditional approach be too limiting in its reach? And has the concept potentially been overutilized? But how do we address these? Here lies the subjective challenge of nature play, like a multiple choice with no right answer. Some may disagree with the concept of predictability entirely. Others might agree, but nonetheless stick to the formula. Some may agree and look to challenge conventions. However, most will likely gravitate somewhere in between. We then move on to, is nature play for everyone? One of the most interesting challenges that nature play may face is that it could be argued that the design characteristics, materials and philosophy of nature play very well may not offer play for all, however, each for different reasons. Is nature play limiting in its reach in that it only caters for particular types of play? Does it only allow for more challenging, play scenarios, such as working with children with ASD, Asperger's or developmental difficulties, which in itself requires a very specialised approach? Maybe nature play is crucial in these scenarios, but also needs broader influence to succeed. How can we provide nature play for true inclusion? As we've explored earlier, nature play could be described as a sensory experience, one of touch and feel, and a fantastic exploration for younger children. It offers a tactile adventure, dirty hands and grubby knees, and a sense of learning through all things natural. But here is where the challenge lies. How can we design nature play that excites and attracts older children? After all, experiencing nature is crucial for all ages, but how can this sensory experience, or at the very least this natural concept, be designed to challenge and excite youth and teens, as these demographics would not want to be seen in the playground with children, let alone playing with sticks and mud with the toddlers. Youth and teen have surely progressed beyond this, likely seeking adrenaline, upper body challenges, more complex risk analysis and mitigation, and also the ability to tackle fear head on. It's not impossible to achieve. This in the natural environment. However, through playground design, the built form is increasingly important to provide these challenges and progression. So during the design and consultation process, where do we see nature play in offering inclusivity? And does that go far enough to offer true inclusion? Some of the considerations could include wheelchair accessibility in a natural setting, engagement for senior citizens or the aging, or experiences for those with intellectual challenges. How can nature play in its rawest form achieve all these things without straying from its traditional brief, at least in some way? Maybe the use of the built form for these broader groups is required, while still ensuring a neutral, sympathetic design, which in itself, this may be a possible challenge that is harder than it seems. In the pursuit of inclusion, the Joe Wheatley All Abilities Play Space in Nedlands, WA incorporates natural and neutral design elements, taking inspiration from nature, as well as traditional inclusive play alternatives such as high back swings, wheelchair carousels, or inclusive seesaws, all portrayed in contrastingly bright colours and constructed forms, which are evidently included to offer a heightened or varied sense of sensory engagement. Is this wrong, or simply an example of a play space looking to offer more in the way of inclusion? In order to offer inclusion, do we need to consider surfacing? Are rocks, varying side elevations, and irregular objects an ideal outcome for a safe and inclusive space? This type of environment or design takes inspiration from nature and applies touches while still offering the traditional play elements of slides, climbs, and elevation in a more controlled, and some may say safe manner, which would no doubt be a strict requirement for a school environment such as this. Therefore, can we still offer nature with non-natural materials? Does a sprawling rubber surface in a neutral colour palette still lend itself to nature play if the overall experience is still nature inspired? Again, I think we'd be dividing the room as to the true intent of nature play. However, here we're presented with a safe, sympathetic, nature-inspired experience, which would have no doubt been designed with nature play at the foundation of its concept, design, and intention. The next challenge we face is that of authenticity. The first question I asked here would be, is this image in fact showing nature play? Some may not be nodding their head in agreement, and others scoffing in sheer disgust. After all, this looks like a hollow log, but in fact is made from fiberglass. It goes back to some of our earlier questions where we asked, if it looks like nature, is it nature? And secondly, is nature just an experience, artificial or otherwise? So how far can we push the idea of nature before it's no longer natural? Here we see a natural setting with beautiful established trees, sprawling mulch and neutral colours and textures. All the correct ingredients for an enjoyable nature play experience. Again, some will say yes, others no. And for those that may have missed the materiality, this is in fact all constructed from artificial materials, a far stretch from authentic nature play. Ultimately, the point we're suggesting here is that you will always have divided opinion as to what is acceptable and sympathetic enough to be deemed nature play before it's no longer nature. Again, here we see a nature play inspired space, natural colours, seemingly natural experiences, but also many unnatural elements such as steel, rubber and fiberglass to give the illusion of nature. As we progress, the images are increasingly inspired and decreasingly reflective of nature. So where do we draw the line? Maybe some would argue that the less natural materials are designed to be easier for service, easier to replace components, easier to certify by safety auditors, and easier to provide a varied range of play. Others might argue it's not worth it. Maybe we're going too far with the idea of nature play. The concept is so popular and on trend, yet we could be missing the point as to how it should be executed. We see here the extreme, and I would think the furthest we could possibly get from true nature play. But a question we'll raise shortly: do children ultimately care? So how can we look to tackle these challenges? To discuss this, I'll now hand over to Ashley to highlight a project which looks to take inspiration from nature, but also provide traditional built elements in keeping with this form, to provide what I would say is one of the most referenced playgrounds in design precedent and concept images when the topic of nature play is described. Ashley.
Thanks, Ryan. Nature's Playground at the Adelaide Zoo opened in 2015, and as Ryan mentioned, is one that we see referenced on mood boards as an aspirational project when talking to designers about what they want to achieve from their nature play space. With this in mind, we wanted to share with you the design theory and background of Wax Studios, who are the landscape architects for this outstanding project. So we thank the team at Wax, and in particular, Amanda Barmer, for their input. The design of the play space was all about providing a stimulating and exciting play experience for children visiting the zoo as a way of enhancing their total zoo experience. Connecting people with nature is one of Adelaide Zoo's main philosophies. The belief from the zoo is that with children being the custodians of the future, the more they can connect with nature, the more of an understanding they will have about the importance of the natural environment around them, and will hopefully lead to greater conservation efforts for the future generations. It's very much about providing a learning outcome. Wax Design Studio approached nature play with the consideration of it being more of an aesthetic as opposed to being a prescribed philosophy. The Adelaide Zoo is a very unique opportunity to provide a nature play learning environment in the established vegetation of the zoo itself. Trees could be manipulated and moved to allow for the best placement of the play elements to give the best user experience while still allowing for integration of naturally aesthetic materials in this unique setting. The play space has what would be considered traditional play elements of nature play, which include a rock-lined creek with tadpoles, water play elements, a sand play, and an area dedicated for cubby building and imaginary play. There are even musical chimes, which add to the already high level of sensory play within the play space. Also, to provide a full play experience for the children, there are traditional play elements that one would find in any suburban playground, which include a bird's nest swing, trampolines, and balancing ropes. The main feature of the play space is a bespoke elevated walkway with timber pods, which provides full views across the zoo to the River Torrens. Constructed from timber to carry the natural aesthetic of the play space, the walkway also incorporates innovative play experiences for users of all ages. as well as the 2 stainless steel slides connected to the elevated walkway, which add another exciting play element for the children. The walkway also supports other play elements, including a variety of custom climbing nets, ladders, and bridge challenges. These were integral into providing a full, challenging play experience for the children. The other challenge with this elevated platform was how to make this accessible for people of all ages and abilities. So through collaboration with the architects Phillips Pilkington, who were working on the visitor centre facilities, a lift was able to be incorporated to give access to the walkway. Other accessible items have also been added to the main play space, such as elevated sand tables and water play elements. These have been connected by a rubber access pathway to allow for full mobility and movement throughout this portion of the play space. It's Lark's belief that this unique space shows how traditional and bespoke play elements constructed from sympathetic natural materials and of colours that complement the natural aesthetic can be incorporated to give a full play experience that does not detract from the overall intent and brief of the client of providing a full nature play experience for people of all ages and abilities. We'll now also take a look at a recently completed project in Warburton, Victoria, which takes inspiration from the surrounding landscape and heritage. And once again, thanks to the team at Papworth Davies for providing the content and insights for the design of this project. Located on the former site of the Warburton Community Pool, there has been a spectacular transformation from a dilapidated ruin to a brand new water play park and playground. And this has evolved into a play space that people of all ages can enjoy. There are picnic, barbecue and bathroom facilities, as well as a large open lawn, which can be used just as a space to spread a rug, kick a ball, or host a variety of community events. The rationale behind the design of the playgrounds was the water play components of the Warburton Recreation Precinct were originally driven by council, requesting for the design to fit into the rural aesthetics of the reserve and be physically and functionally aligned with the river and the needs of the Warburton Township and community. This was achieved through the creation of undulating landforms in the splash park, evoking the surrounding mountains and hills and the enclosed nature of the valley. The environment of the nearby Yarra River is also referenced in the design of the splash park, and the selection of water play elements that pick up on this suggest the river edges tall ferns and large rocks. The park already had a large number of native and exotic trees, which were able to be retained and integrated into the design of the park, further reinforcing the natural qualities of the spaces. Equipment selection was also key to the design, ensuring a natural timber field was utilised throughout in keeping with the design intent. The landmark tower was an important consideration as it provided a striking visual counterpoint to the wow factor of the splash park, but also provides visitors a bird's eye view across the entire precinct, which cannot be achieved elsewhere. Excitingly, the feature tower is the largest play structure at the Warburton precinct. Standing at 10 metres in height, it was chosen due to its dominant yet understated presence. I'll now hand back to Ryan for the conclusion of this online learning session. Ryan.
Thanks, Ashley. So I'm just going to discuss on a few points here. Can we broaden our interpretation of nature play? Is it wrong to build nature? The questions we asked earlier today included, is nature play just an experience and shaped by one's surroundings? Is nature play simply a matter of touch and feel? And if we make it look authentic enough, is that good enough? Given these questions, if we design a space which has a natural surrounding and natural elements complemented by traditional play, does this meet the brief? A challenging scenario we commonly are presented with is one where nature themed is readily required. However, timber is out of the question. So how do we create nature play when there is a specific brief to exclude natural materials? How can we use steel, for example, to create something sympathetic? We saw earlier that timber is both important to nature play, but contrastingly, authenticity comes into question when using other materials. We see here an example of a steel fabricated structure which does not use timber, but extends a neutral palette of colours, soft lines, and no hard or harsh built structures, and provides the engaging elements of traditional play through climbing, sliding, swinging, or balancing in a light and delicate manner. Just one example of broadening how nature play could be interpreted. A second example of broadening nature play is the incorporation of exercise. Is this digressing too far from the brief, or possibly added and complementing if the ingredients are right. If we utilise neutral colours, natural surroundings and landscapes, and natural timber equipment materials, can this be successful to provide multi-generational spaces and be introduced alongside more traditional elements? I think the sweet spot is not necessarily being so literal in the interpretation of nature play, but paying respect to the intent. The key words we've used throughout today, after all, have been influence, inspiration, interpretation, and sympathy. In saying this, much of the deliberation into a design is influenced by community consultation, and the common trend is that traditional elements are not just suggested, but expected. Nature play is valuable, but the community who will be using the space on a daily basis will almost demand that the slide, swing, climbing frame, carousel, or rocker are all in place, and that the design caters not just for a young child, but for toddlers, youth, and teens. A near impossible feat on a limited budget, but an expectation nonetheless. This traditional expectation leads to a requirement for design to stray from the brief just that little bit in order to offer something for everyone, especially the vocal local community. In light of all these questions we've posed today, possibly the most important of all, and one which goes back to the root purpose of what we are trying to achieve, is, do children care? We've commented that natural play could be too predictable, so do children care? Children find fun and experiences in all scenarios. We commented that authenticity could be problematic. Again, do children care? If non-natural materials are utilised, do children enjoy the experience any less? It could be said that the ideal outcome is to find a harmony somewhere in between. Provide the logs, rocks, sand and mulch, or even the dry creek bed, but extend from this to provide a space that can incorporate the built form that is both sympathetic to and inspired from nature, not just for young children in the early years of development, but for youth, teen and adults to all be able to appreciate and engage in their own unique way. One is not mutually exclusive from the other, and they go hand in hand to provide memorable spaces and experiences. We should not deprive children of a full play experience because built structures do not fit within a certain ideology, and it is likely that these built structures, in keeping with a sympathetic theme, but providing challenge, is what provides children the broadest range of experience and enjoyment. The last area to comment today is on the utilisation of sand and water play, a common inclusion in many design briefs. However, where does one draw the line between what is acceptable or sympathetic enough? The ability to provide tactile experiences with sand and water is crucial to children's development, but also is simply fun. The utilisation of built elements such as pumps, troughs, weirs, corkscrews, channels and tables are all incidental and simply tools which do not detract from the experience, but moreover complement and provide a method to work with the natural environment and natural elements in ways not traditionally possible. These types of experiences can be scalable from smaller dedicated sand play areas, as we see here, to impressive destinational style structures, which provide the same experiences on a more elaborate scale. Again, the inclusion of such structures might not be seen as nature play. However, through engaging with natural materials in a sympathetic surrounding or landscape, it can surely be argued the experience outweighs the fact it might digress from the traditional recipe mentioned earlier of rocks, logs, sand and mulch. So thank you everyone. On behalf of Ashley and I would like to thank you for your time and hope we've provided some challenging ideas, new perspectives, and importantly stimulate some broader discussion. Always remember to play up and work out. Thanks everyone.
Thanks Ashley and Ryan. That concludes today's event. I can see we've got some comments and questions, and these will be responded to directly by email shortly. We'd appreciate you completing our short survey. The link will pop up in a minute when you sign off, and we'll also send you a link to the recording. Thanks very much, and we look forward to seeing you next time.